In this video, I go down to Florida to visit family, play a few poker tournaments, see some friends, and overall to have a good time while hopefully making profit to add to my World Series of Poker main event savings goal. It takes me roughly 9.5 to 10 hours to drive to visit my parents. My mom lives in Punta Gorda and my dad lives in Cape Coral. Both are south of Tampa on the west side of Florida. I dropped my dog off at my mom's and eventually made my way to Cape Coral to see my dad, my stepmom, my grandparents, my brother, and his fiance. We hung out by the pool a bunch, on the dock, we even went kayaking. We also went golfing at Burnstone Marina Country Club, which is a golf course about 5 minutes up the road from my dad's house. My brother won the 9-hole match with a 45. My dad got second with a 50, and I got dead last with a dreadful 52. We also went out to a bunch of nice waterside lunches and dinners, and I made sure to take advantage of the seafood options just because the quality here is so much better. Two of the restaurants we went to were at the spot called the Fisherman's Village, and here's a view of the marina. I went to a spot called Village Brewhouse for lunch with my mom, and I got the grouper fajitas, which were solid. I give them a 7.8 out of 10. I also got mahi mahi tacos at a restaurant called Fuzzy's that I went to with my dad, stepmom, and grandparents, and those were also delicious. I give those an 8.1 out of 10. After spending a bunch of quality time with my family, it's officially time to go play some poker and try to go win some social security money from the kind old folks of Southwest Florida. I'm on my way to meet my buddy Aaron, a full-time professional poker player who is local to the area, at Derby Poker Club, which was formerly known as Derby Lanes. It was an Italian Greyhound racetrack that also featured poker, as well as other table games. They were running a $200 10K guaranteed tournament that Tuesday, following my first weekend in Florida. My grandparents had just left, so I figured why not go play a bit. I didn't have a chance to run to the ATM that day because I had to work till 5 p.m. and I also had to drive 2 hours to St. Pete. But I did have $160 cash on me already, and luckily Aaron saved me on the ATM fee at the poker room and lent me $240, which was exactly enough to fire 2 bullets if necessary, and the plan was to pay him back if I cashed, otherwise I would just give him money later that week at the Hardrock. Early stages I won a lot of small pots post-flop. I even doubled up a few shorties including ace-queen into aces, but it never really seemed to matter much because I never had any fold equity or enough chips to dent my stack significantly, so I never faced any major setbacks at the start. So the guy to my left in this hand was a classic gift shop Gary, or in other words, the typical middle-aged white guy who talks about his annual trip to the World Series of Poker while wearing an outfit straight from the gift shop, typically either a hat, a sweatshirt, or maybe a car protector. He was playing incredibly tight and had just doubled up with a set of 7s after nearly blinding out after late registration closed. In this spot, he shoves on me for just under 10 big blinds at the 2K big blind level after I open raise to 4,500. Only reason I didn't call much quicker was because of how tight he'd been playing, but at the same time, the reason I ended up calling is because he had very little fold equity. He also had a bit of that guy equity too, meaning it, let's bust this jackass. That was a few seconds late coming back from break. He was urging the dealer to muck my cards rather than trying to be a good person and helping me out. I jokingly called him the poker police. He got really salty and went deep into the rules after that. We win a small flip and send old Gary to the showers. When we got down to the final 3 tables, I get moved next to, let's call her Crazy Derby Lady. My friend Aaron's walking behind me as I'm moving tables, and he goes to her, oh, he's the best. And I guess they have some familiarity because he's a local, and she goes, oh, he's the best, huh? And I go, nah, I'm not the best. And funny enough, I opened the very first hand from under the gun at the 3K big blind level to 6,000 with Queen Jack of Spade. Folds around her in the big blind, and she clicks it to 14,000, which is a very small 3-bet. I don't have any reads on her. I haven't played with her at all yet, and I elect to just call with a very playable hand. Flop comes king, 6, deuce, 1 spade, so we have 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight. She c-bets about a third pot to 11,000 into 32,500, and she looks me dead in the eye and goes, what would the best do here? And I say the best would probably raise, and I actually considering our backdoor outs, and we have a lot of turns we could barrel, a lot of good bluff cards. Ultimately, I decided to just let it go after looking at her chip stack. She didn't have a ton behind. I didn't have a ton of room to get cute, and after I fold, she flips over a 6-4 offsuit and just completely owned me. But our new friend Crazy Derby Lady drags in the pot with a smirk on her face, and I'm almost positive she wouldn't have made this move if my friend didn't make that comment. Me and Crazy Derby Lady proceeded to have a very funny dynamic for the rest of the night. She loved to table talk, she loved to play mind games. Eventually we started to play commando, as my cousin Richard calls it, when you don't even look at your cards. We were just staring into each other's souls, trying to outplay each other. It was super weird, but it was fun. A little bit later, I'm still the table chip leader, look down at Queen 9 of spades under the gun, and I raise into Crazy Derby Lady's big blind once again. She makes a comment, do you raise my big blind every single time the best? And I have to assure her, no, I'm not picking on you. Fold around to her. She's got no fold equity at this point, only around 5 big blinds. She shoves all in. I snap call, and I'm essentially off to a race against ace-3 offsuit. But not for long because the flop comes ace-3x and the turn's an ace, so we're drawing dead on the turn. Our friend sticks around for just a little bit longer. We eventually get in this very weird blind versus blind confrontation where she had just doubled up through me, but she was still relatively short. She limps the small blind, just staring at me, and I check back without even looking at my cards. We had developed this really weird dynamic at this point where that was just kind of the thing we were doing. Flop comes jack high, but I don't even look at the flop. I'm just still staring at her. She essentially checks dark while staring at me, and I check back without looking at my cards or the flop. He checks again. At this point, I don't know if she's looked. I don't know if she's weak. At this point, I got to look at my cards. I look down at Jack 3 offsuit, so I have top pair. Typically, I actually would have ISO raised this spot pre-flop to 3.5x, do it with the top of range, bottom of range, junky combos. Nevertheless, I just make it big, looking like I'm trying to steal. That's kind of how we were playing at this point, just kind of doing stupid shit. She snap goes all in, and the turn brought in a backdoor flush draw, so I didn't even think twice about it. I snap call her. She only has maybe 20k on top. We're all in against 10-8 of spades. She picked up the backdoor flush draw, bricks the flush draw, and we hold. And we say bye to our friend Crazy Derby Lady. Only 11 spots were paid, but the min cash was a very solid $625, which was slightly over 3 times the buy-in since they only paid 10% of the field. So the bubble was really weird. The floor made a mistake and put 12 players remaining on the board, which would be the stone bubble, when there was actually 13 players remaining. And we went hand for hand for almost 20 minutes prematurely, and then because we lost so much time, everyone in the field remaining agreed that we just wouldn't go hand for hand anymore. And that went on for another 5-10 minutes before another floor person came out and said, hey, you can't do that. That's not a thing. You can't just agree to not go hand for hand. And we went hand for hand again for maybe one hand, and now we're in the money. The bubble just burst, and I have 271,000 chips at the 10k big blind level, and I'm in raised to 20,000 from middle position with pocket jacks. It folds around to the button, who shoves all in for just over 200,000, and I expect combos that dominate us like queens plus to 3-bet not all in, so we should have the effective nuts pre-flop. I quickly make the call for 20 big blinds effective, and we're off to a huge race going into the final table. Final table was a battle, and the average stack was roughly only 15 to 20 big blinds, as it eventually turned into a super turbo. I was second in chips with 7 left when I got into a crucial 60-40 button versus big blind against a local regular who was one of the only strong players remaining in the tournament. We got it all in pre-flop, my ace-queen offsuit versus his king-jack suited, and unfortunately he flopped a jack and I didn't improve. Thanks to spots I took earlier on in the tournament, as well as at the final table, I was still alive with 160,000, but I was on fumes given the fast structure. Fortunately, I was able to get several all-ins through with marginal holdings such as queen-jack offsuit, ace-6 offsuit to stay afloat for a bit, allow for some collision, and ultimately I laddered up to 5th place for $1,420. Probably 10 minutes after I busted, they ended up chopping 3-handed for just over $3,500 each. No complaints, great start to the trip. I was in for 1 bullet, so I only had to pay back my buddy $40. Can't help but feel a little disappointed though. Had I won that ace-queen offsuit spot, not only would I have been the chip leader, but I would have knocked out the strongest player remaining. But I was happy to get my chips in that spot. Can't control the run out, so at the end of the day, I'm at peace, and plenty more opportunities this trip, so let's go.
Just pulled up to Tampa Hardrock. Let's get it.
I made my way back to my family for a few days before eventually returning to the Tampa area for more poker. This time at the Tampa Hardrock for their $400 200k guaranteed multi-flight opener. The Guitar Hotel in Miami is a lot cooler and overall much nicer, but there are definitely still a lot of interesting music-related attractions that are worth checking out on your way to the poker room. This is the poker room at the Tampa Hardrock, where they run both cash games and tournaments. There were a ton of day ones throughout the week for this $400 200k guaranteed event, but I'm showing up at the last minute for the final flight on Saturday, so this is my only chance to find a bag for day 2. Very first hand I sit down, the blinds are 200, 300, 300. We're 30k effective, so 100 big blinds deep. I opened a 3x from the hijack with 9-8 of diamonds, cut off flats and the big blind defends. Flop comes king 4-2 rainbow with 1 diamond, and the pot's 2,900 at this point. The big blind checks. I like to c-bet 900, which is about 1/3 pot. Reason for this is we have the range and nut advantage, have a backdoor flush draw and only 9 high. I could fold out a lot of better hands, we could turn some decent equity, and we could bluff later streets. The cutoff calls and the big blind folds. The turns an offsuit ace, so no backdoor flush draw comes in. The pot's 4,700 at this point. I double barrel for 2,300. And the cutoff snap folds. This might be a bit out of line, picking up no equity, but I figure this is the perfect card for us to barrel. Lines are 300, 500, 500, and I'm 50k effective with the main villain in this hand. I open king 4 of spades to 1300 from the hijack. Cutoff calls, the small blind calls, and the big blind defends, so we go 4 ways to a flop. Flop comes king 10-7 rainbow 1 spade, and there's 5,700 in the middle. It checks around to the cutoff, who bets 1300, which is roughly a 1/4 pot. Small blind folds, big blind calls, and I call, so we go 3 ways to the turn. The turn is the 4 of clubs, which brings in a backdoor flush draw and also gives me 2 pair. We both check to the cutoff, and he checks behind in position. The river's an offsuit 5, so the club draw doesn't complete. The big blind checks, and I figure at this point I almost always have the best hand and need to extract max value. Overbetting isn't really a thing in multi-way pots, so our preferred large sizing here would be 3/4 pot to pot size. I elect to bet 8,000 into 9,600. The cutoff folds and the big blind 10 calls, and we win a nice 25,600 chip pot. The blinds are up to 300, 600, 600, and I'm lucky enough to pick up pocket aces under the gun too. I raised to 1,500, and the low jack calls, the cutoff calls, and a lady who had just doubled up earlier, who was still relatively short stacked, snap goes all in on the button. It folds around to me and I ask for a count and she's only got 10,500 chips. I cover everyone in the hand, but I'm still pretty deep with the cutoff who has roughly 60,000 chips or 100 big blinds. Otherwise, I might just call here. I ultimately elect to 4-bet click it to 23,500. The low jack snap folds and the cutoff tank folds what he claims was pocket jacks. I'm all in versus short stack who has pocket queens, hoping to win a nice pot with some overlay in it. The blinds are still 300, 600, 600, and we're roughly 60k effective in this hand, which is 2x starting stack. The cutoff opens 3x to 1800, and I defend the big blind with queen 7 of hearts. The flop comes king, king 5, rainbow 1 heart, and there's 4,500 in the pot. I check. The cutoff c-bets 1500, I check raise to 6200, and the cutoff tank folds. My reasons for taking this line are as follows. A large portion of our range is going to want to play as a check raise here, which is a common theme on paired boards heads up from the big blind. Late positions range is also going to be very wide and should be playing a pure range bet, which we could attack. We block king queen, and we also can get better queen x to folds such as queen jack and queen 10. And we have backdoor hearts, which we could barrel as well. This specific combo might be slightly out of line, but mix that with the fact that population way over folds versus check raises in general, I tend to get a bit greedier than theory suggests in this spot. Lines are up to 400, 800, 800. Late registration's almost over, and I have around 70,000 chips now. Under the gun goes all in for 4,500. Under the gun 2 calls, and I look down at ace king offsuit on the button. I'm too deep effective with under the gun 2 to just shove here, so I elect a 3-bet non all in to 16,300, which is roughly 3.5x the all in. Under the gun 2 tank folds, and we get it all in versus 8-6 offsuit for a classic Florida poker flip. I've been pretty much smooth sailing all day, and my good fortune continues as I pick up pocket kings under the gun 1. Late registration's over at this point, and I'm in raised to 4,000 at the 2k big blind level. Old man coffee, who just moved to my table, 3-bets me to 11,000 from the hijack, and we're 55,000 effective. We aren't close to the money just yet, and without any strong reads, it'd be hard to argue just flat calling out of position here. Folding would obviously be a sin. I 4-bet all in for just over 25 big blinds effective. He snap calls, and we get shown the bad news. Thought I was out of the tournament, but we covered him by 8,500 chips, and I have a hope and a prayer. I'm the next big blind and have to shove an extremely wide range from under the gun with the last of my chips, as I'm basically going to be forced all in the next hand with the big blind ante. I go all in with queen 3 of clubs, and both middle position and the big blind call me, and I have a chance to triple up. The flop comes king 6 3 2 spades 1 club. Big blind checks, and middle position snap goes all in, giving me protection, and the big blind shows a 6 and folds. I hold versus ace queen of spades, and suddenly I'm back to 28,500 chips. Shortly after, the cutoff opens to 6,000 at the 3k big blind level. The button flats, and I go all in with pocket 7s from the big blind for just under 10 bigs. The cutoff 4-bets, the button folds, and we're off to the races against ace jack offsuit. I'm starting to rebuild my stack, and in this hand I raise ace 10 offsuit, get no action, and steal some much needed blinds at the end of day 1. I blinded down a bit and eventually shoved 9-8 offsuit blind versus blind for 30,000 at the 4k big blind level, and I get snap called by ace 2 of spades. Fortunately, I flop an 8 and I'm able to hold. I was able to get one more shove through blind versus blind with ace jack offsuit, and I took every spot I could find at the end of day 1, but by the time my friend Juan burst the bubble with his pocket 10s versus pocket 2s, I was left with only a starting stack of 30,000 chips in a dream when we bagged for day 2. But I'm honestly just grateful to still be alive after the kings versus aces hand, to be in the money and to have a chance to spin it up. Both my friend Aaron and I bagged up short stacks for day 2, and we celebrated by grabbing drinks and playing the Wonka slot.
Let's go.
We profited a whole $5, and the plan was to parlay it on the money wheel, but we couldn't find one anywhere. Aaron grabbed me a kind bar during the tournament earlier, but I hadn't eaten much otherwise, so I went and grabbed chicken and steak fajitas from the Hard Rock Cafe before heading back to my mom's house in Punta Gorda, and the plan was to come back early in the morning for day 2. There were 1,082 total entries over 6 starting flights, creating a prize pool worth over $357,000, and 137 players return on day 2, all guaranteed a min cash of $580, with first place being $59,500 and a Tampa Poker Classic trophy. Juan and Aaron both made day 2 as well, and Juan bagged nearly 300,000 chips. I may have bagged a short stack for day 2, but I'm honestly just happy to be alive still, and anything could happen if things go my way early. Ideally, I don't start the day in the blinds and can find some good spots to open shove. I was lucky enough to draw the button in seat 7 given how short I was and how significant the big blind ante is. I looked down at 40% of a royal flush 3 hands into the day in the hijack, and I go all in for 30,000 chips at the 6k big blind level. Folds around to the big blind who's a local regular, and he ends up tanking forever. I keep taking sips of my coffee, trying to give off reverse tells that I'm really strong. He's not buying it, he flicks in the call with queen 4 suited, and somehow I'm behind. I even turn a flush draw, but I brick the river, and I'm out very quickly in 133rd place for slightly above a min cash and $610. Oh well, on to the next. I was originally planning to head back to my parents after day 2, but I got knocked out so quickly that I figured I might as well stay and play at that point, especially considering a $200 one-day event just started at noon, so I decided to jump in what would be the final tournament of my trip to Florida. Starting stack's 25,000 in this one, and the very first orbit I sit down, there's multiple limps starting from middle position at the 300 big blind level. I complete the small blind with pocket 2s, and luckily for me the flop comes ace 8-2 rainbow, so I flop bottom set. It checks around to the original limper who bets, I check raise, he goes all in, and I snap call and fade an ace versus ace 2 of hearts for a very nice double early on. I opened from the cutoff with pocket 8s to 1500 at the 700 big blind level off of about 50,000 chips, button flat, and the small blind shoves all in for 14,500, which was just over 20 big blinds. Pocket 7s is probably my bottom here, and I covered the button and the small blind by a lot, both of which had less than a starting stack, so I elect to 4-bet all in, assuming the button's range should be relatively capped. Button folds what he claims was ace queen, so assuming he wasn't lying, he was much stronger than I expected. I'm shown the good news as the small blind flips over pocket 7s. 10-8 suited is my favorite hand, specifically 10-8 of clubs, mainly because it's always flopped so well for me historically. I flat 10-8 of clubs versus a min-raise small blind versus button at the 800 big blind level, and the big blind defends. The flop comes 9-7-6-2 clubs, so the tradition continues and I flop gin with the nut straight with the flush draw. I check, and the big blind, who's the same guy who claimed to fold ace queen earlier, donk ships all in for 20,000. The button folds, I snap call, and I hold versus king 3 of clubs for another nice pot going into the end of late registration. Going into the break and getting close to being in the money, I managed to chip up to 187,000 coming back to the 6k big blind level. Approaching the bubble, I won a lot of small pots by open raising a ton, playing post flop in position, 3-betting with blocker combos, ISO raising over limps with a wide range, and by attacking capped ranges blind versus blind with my junky combo such as 9-3 offsuit. I should be in the money shortly after we return, but this event's turning into a turbo very quickly, so I need to keep my foot on the gas. I lost a few small pots on the bubble, and I'm officially in the money now at the 8k big blind level. The very first hand I raise ace 9 offsuit from the cutoff to 16,000 off of 107,000 chips. There are arguments for just open shoving here, but I prefer to play a non-all-in min raise in softer fields. The flop comes ace 7 5-2 diamonds, and there's 44,000 chips in the pot. I see bet 13,000 and the big blind calls. It turns the 2 of spades, putting a double flush draw on board, both of which I unblock, and the pot's now 70,000. I go all in for 78,000, which is just over pot, and the big blind snap calls with a set of 7s. And just like that, I'm showered and out in 28th place for $340. I spoke with my coach Ian Matakis afterwards, and he said that we typically prefer to barrel small, but shove is fine if we unblock both suits. I figured the big blind would shove all pocket pairs and stronger ace-x preflop, but I failed to remember that most people down in Florida play very passively. GG's. It's always disappointing when you make several deep runs and don't close any of them out, but overall, I'm very happy with how this trip went. I played 3 tournaments, cashed all 3 of them on a single bullet, and I also made a final table. I got 5th place out of 109 entries in the $200 10k guaranteed at Derby for $1,420, 133rd out of 1,089 entries in the $400 200k guaranteed multi-flight event at the Tampa Hardrock for $610, and I also got 28th out of 218 entries in the $200 bankroll builder at the Hardrock for $340. I was in for a total of $800 in buy-ins, $2,370 in cashes, and my overall profit on the trip was $1,570. Before the profit I made on the trip, my World Series of Poker main event savings account balance was at $1,766, not including the $1,000 Benz offered me for 5%, which I couldn't be more grateful for. I plan to save up as much money as possible between now and July, and I'll sell action as needed. I'm gonna take some time off to study. My next live trip will be Cherokee in May, unless something else pops up between now and then. I'll definitely mix in some online tournaments in the meantime. Make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for more updates on my road to the main event, and thank you for watching.